Welcome everyone, my name is Sukant Chand and I'm hosting on behalf of the Tricontinental Anti-Imperialist Platform this evening. Just a few introductory remarks. Thanks as ever to Houseman's Bookshop for hosting the space this evening. We've been working together now in our second year in doing different events here. Some of you might remember previous events, most recent of which was a fantastic event with a comrade from the North Korean embassy actually, and we tied together the siege of what's actually known as the Democratic People's Republic of Korea by US and generally Western imperialism, and paralleling that with the microcosm of the global war by neo-colonialism within the West itself in relation specifically to Mike Brown and Ferguson and the rising movements against police brutality. So that was one recent event which is on YouTube. You can check out. The Tricontinental also had a quite historic event recently, just a few weeks ago, in the Houses of Parliament in Committee Room 15, where we hosted through a live internet link Dr. Musa Ibrahim, who was the Libyan Jamahiriya government's last media spokesperson. And he's still wanted by NATO. He's on the red list of Interpol. So he's still underground. But we managed to pull off the event and pinch the nose of the greatest purveyors of violence on the planet today, who had destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, who in the process of destroying Somalia, Nigeria, Mali, Libya, obviously, and many other countries of the global south. The Tricontinental itself is a unique organization on this island, in the sense that it gives primacy to and takes leadership from the actually existing historical and current struggles today against neo-colonialism, or what the decolonial analysts and thinkers call the colonial matrix of power. Now, decoloniality has become a very fashionable term, and actually many people who are imbued with neo-colonial Eurocentric prejudices are hiding behind the decolonial label. But those who have been involved in real nitty-gritty historical and present decolonial actual struggles will tell you themselves it's no joke, it's no posture, it's actually a life and death struggle. And we're really pleased to have different comrades in the room who are involved in struggle of different generations. But I would like to especially welcome our brother and veteran revolutionary George Shire from ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. But of course we have our special guest today, who's sitting to my right. That's elder brother, respected comrade, Black Panther alumni, former Seattle chapter leader of the Black Panther, Aaron Dixon. So if you could please give a London welcome to him. We're going to go straight into this. What we're going to do, we're going to be in conversation for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open up and we'll have a collective conversation with the rest of you guys, if that's okay. Aaron, welcome. It's great to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'd like to also just give special thanks to brother Billy X Jennings, the head of the Black Panther alumni, who is an old friend of ours now since 2008. And whenever your comrades are coming over to this side of the waters, he calls myself and Sister Carrie, who's hosting you as well, and to ensure that our comrades are hosted correctly and appropriately with all the comforts of home. So I hope we've delivered that to you. And thanks also to Emery Douglas as well, and Charlotte O'Neill, and all the other Panther veterans that we've had the privilege of working together with. We had an event with in dedication to Assata Shakur and Sundiata Akoli recently, which some of you were at the event, including Sister Shirley. And that event is on YouTube as well, so please check it out and share it with your friends. For those of you who are tweeting, and please do tweet away from the event, it's hashtag one word Aaron Dixon Panther. So please do tweet that. So we are kind of presenting your life, work and struggle, which is manifested in the book that you've written, which is here, My People Are Rising, Memoirs of a Black Panther Captain. I'm just going to really kind of start chronologically towards the beginning part of your politicization, which probably starts with your parents' involvement and support of Paul Robeson and the political movements he was involved in. So perhaps you would like to impart some of that experience you had as a child growing up in that political milieu of your family, and what through that led you on then to consider and then joining the Black Panther Party in Seattle.
Okay, well, first of all, my generation was a generation that grew up with the oral tradition. You know, and the oral tradition is when the elders spend a lot of time sharing their history and their memories with the younger people, with the generation. So it was, it wasn't just my father and my mother; it was my grandparents and aunts and uncles as well that were always sharing their history, their personal history, and what they knew about the journey of black people and our family. But my father really played a key role as well, because he shared a lot of his stories, and most of those stories were about his involvement with in joining the army when World War II broke out. And most of those stories were about his experience in Mississippi, after he finished boot camp, and him and many of his fellow black soldiers were shipped to Mississippi, and the experiences that they had, and they literally had to fight for their lives. They hadn't even got to the actual war yet. It seemed like the war for them was in Mississippi, as they were preparing to go either to Europe or to the Pacific Theater. But maybe I could just share one of those stories with you. And one of those stories was that him and his fellow soldiers were marching on a very hot, muggy day in Mississippi. And they had been marching for several hours, and they came across a field that they needed to cross so they wouldn't have to go back to the swamps. But when they approached the field, they were approached by a white farmer who pointed a shotgun at them and said, "You niggers aren't marching across my field," which meant they had to go through the swamp. But my father tells me that that night, after they had set up camp and gone to sleep, that him and some of his fellow comrades went back to the farm and burned down the barn of the farmer. So that was his first act of rebellion. Also, he shared the story that him and his fellow soldiers were preparing to go out on furlough for the weekend, and the commanding officer came in and told them that their furlough was canceled, that they had to clean the toilets of the latrine of the white soldiers. And of course, them being from Chicago, they weren't used to that. They weren't used to that treatment, so they rebelled and they started a riot that lasted for almost 3 days. Burning the furniture and throwing it on the courtyard and refusing orders until a train was brought in and shipped him out. And eventually he ended up in the Philippines, where he participated in a lot of combat, and then he ended up in Okinawa. And he saw something in Okinawa that really changed how he felt about his country. He saw a white Marine cut the breast off of a dead Japanese woman and hold it up in the air and start yelling. And he grabbed his rifle and he was going to try to shoot this Marine, and he was stopped by his fellow comrades. But he was so despondent over this incident that he went AWOL. And he eventually came back, and then he came back to the U.S. because the war had ended. And because of those things that happened to him, he began to seek out information, and he began to seek out other organizations. And because there was a strong left that existed in the U.S. at that time, and the Communist Party was very strong as well. So he sought out Paul Robeson's organization, became part of Paul Robeson's youth security brigade that he had, and he talked about, going to Soldiers Field in Chicago and hearing Paul Robeson speak. And he, had a brief contact with the Communist Party. I do remember one night when we lived in Champaign, Illinois, some men in dark suits came by the house, and my father didn't open the door. He wouldn't let them in. But I assumed that they were the FBI or some agency that was coming to talk to him about his involvement in the Communist Party. But my father, both my parents always talked about Paul Robeson, and they held him in tremendous regard, and we grew up listening to Paul Robeson's songs.
If you don't mind, sorry, I just realized that because we know about Paul Robeson and stuff, I'm assuming that everyone else in the room knows a lot about him. So if you could maybe describe just briefly who Paul Robeson was and why was he such a important person in the history of the black liberation and revolutionary socialist struggle.
Well, Paul Robeson was just an outstanding human being. He was a Rhodes Scholar at I believe it was Harvard, or
I think it was at Rutgers.
Rutgers, yeah. And he was also an all-star athlete, and then he became an entertainer in the 1930s, the early 1930s. He was the highest paid entertainer in America. He had a tremendous voice. He had a tremendous presence. He could act very well, and he was very much sought at. But he had also seen the conditions of what was happening with black people, not just black people, but white people as well. And so he did join the Communist Party, became a member of the Communist Party, spent a lot of time traveling and speaking about the injustices that he saw. And eventually, the U.S. took his passport away and stopped him from being able to make a living. That's what I know of Paul Robeson.
He actually came to London and he performed the play Othello here famously as well. He also he made a feature film about the struggle of the Welsh miners. I think it's called Call from the Valley is the feature film. He was a really amazingly prolific revolutionary
Very
man.
prolific.
He was also a comrade of Claudia Jones, who was as many black radical people in this island from a Trini background, who was a communist leader in New York, who expelled from the United States, made her home here, and helped to start the beginnings of the Notting Hill Carnival, and set up the first real radical black and Asian working class newspaper with another Maoist comrade called Manchanda. So there's lots of links with Paul Robeson here. Just a quote from your book. You say, the Black Panther Party represented a proud, defiant presence in the community, something not seen since the likes of Marcus Garvey and Paul Robeson. A presence that would stand up and fight back against the racist cops and racist institutions of the United States. So I just wanted to ask you, what was the immediacy that brought the Black Panther Party to your attention and you joining it?
Well, I had been involved in the Black Student Union at the University of Washington when I was a freshman there. There were only 35 black students there at the time, and we started the first Black Student Union in the Northwest. And I also had a brief experience working with SNCC. And when I was younger, I had marched with Martin Luther King when I was about 12, 13 years old. I had marched with Martin Luther King and started getting involved in the civil rights movement, going on marches and demonstrations, and I even volunteered for the busing to integrate the schools, and I volunteered to I was one of the first students to volunteer to travel across town to integrate in an all-white school. I was about 13 years old. So while in the BSU, we were arrested for closing down a school, and the very same day that we were arrested, while sitting in jail, we heard about the death of Martin Luther King. And of course, we were all extremely angry and shocked that Martin Luther King, a man of peace and love, had been killed like that. And I had personally met Martin Luther King, and you know, we were all devastated, and we were watching the news. We were watching the news of the riots that were breaking out all across the country, from Harlem to Philadelphia to New Jersey to DC and Chicago and Detroit and LA and everywhere. And of course, us being young, we wanted to be out there on the streets too, rioting, expressing our anger at the death of Martin Luther King. I remember that night going back to my bunk, and I remember saying to myself that my picket sign was going to be replaced by the gun. Now, I didn't realize that young people all across the country were also thinking the same thing. Whites, students, blacks, Asians, Latinos. We had all watched Martin Luther King. We all loved and admired Martin Luther King, but we began to realize that it was going to take stronger action for us to achieve what we wanted to achieve. And right after we were released from jail, we traveled to San Francisco to a Black Student Union conference. And also, when Martin Luther King was killed, the first Panther, little Bobby Hutton, who was 14 years old when he joined the Black Panther Party, and who was now 17 years old, was also killed in an incident, in a shootout that happened. And he was cornered in a house with Eldridge Cleaver, and the house was surrounded by police. They shot thousands of rounds of ammo into the house. They realized they had to surrender. Little Bobby Hutton threw out his carbine, and they walked out into the night, and the police told little Bobby Hutton to run to his car, and they shot him 20 times. 17 years old, little Bobby Hutton. He was the first to join and the first to die. Later, so when we went to the Black Student Union Conference, Bobby Seale came to give the keynote address. And also, we went to little Bobby Hutton's funeral. My brothers and several members of the BSU, we heard about the funeral of little Bobby Hutton, and we traveled to Oakland and went to his funeral. And I just remember, because by that time we had decided that we were revolutionaries. We were going to join the revolution. And I remember the crying and the moaning of little Bobby Hutton's family, and I remember his casket, and we had to go around and look at his body. And I just remember saying, you know, this is the revolution. This is what the revolution is about. And so a week later, Bobby Seale traveled to Seattle, because when he spoke at San Francisco State, we made a beeline to where he was speaking when he finished. And we told him we wanted to have a chapter of the Black Panther Party in Seattle. And a week later, he came to Seattle and started the first chapter outside of California. I was 19. And I was appointed as captain of the Seattle chapter. And the first thing he told us was that we had to have 2,000 rounds of ammunition and two weapons. He also told us that we had to read 2 hours a day. We had to have political education class twice a week, and we were given a book list of 25 books that we were instructed that we had to read.
That kind of brings me, I want to connect that experience that you had and the movement had in the United States, and just kind of zoom out and to put it into a global context. We were discussing this the other day. I mean, paralleling it with today, the glaring difference is that in your generation, it was a time of a clearly upwardly expanding global revolutionary movement, which was in some cases still fighting direct colonialism, still in the 60s and 70s. I mean, and in other cases it was fighting neo-colonialism, which Malcolm X defined in his term called dollarism, the indirect colonial rule through neo-colonialism. Che Guevara was inspiring you, he was alive. Fidel Castro, the Cuban Revolution had just happened. Africa was ablaze with revolutionary warfare of national liberation struggles. Vietnam was the primary example inspiring the world through their sacrifice and organization and discipline and defeating imperialism. Today, and also we had a leadership in the global struggle as well. So Che was reaching out, Castro was reaching out. People in Africa, SWAPO, MPLA, ZANU, FLN, the Vietnamese communists, China was an inspiring model. So all of this, the sacrifice, the leadership and the ideology, and I just wanted you, if you don't mind, quoting your own book in relation to Algeria. And FLN Algeria still exists today, and it's still in the crosshairs for NATO regime change. It's still Algeria today. It's a different circumstances of struggle we have on the planet today globally than we did perhaps in the 60s and 70s. Nevertheless, Algeria is still a major contributor to the African Development Bank. Algeria is still a frontline state. It still has close international relations with some of the more radical third world so-called countries or global south countries. So if you don't mind just reading this, because Eldridge Cleaver and Kathleen, some other comrades, saw exile in Algiers at that time. And Aaron...
Okay, but I just want to add, because you forgot South America.
South America, of course. I mentioned Cuba,
South
but
America, Brazil had a revolutionary movement. Argentina had a revolutionary movement. And Nicaragua were starting their revolutionary movement. So revolution was all over the world, and the guerrillas in Brazil had created a pamphlet called the Mini Manual for Urban Guerrilla Warfare. And in that manual it showed how to make Molotov cocktails, how to do all kinds of things, and that pamphlet made it up into the U.S., into our hands. So yeah, we were very much influenced. Revolution was the order of the day throughout the world. So I will read this. Eldridge Cleaver had been living in Algeria with Kathleen and their 2 children. He and the party had been granted diplomatic status by the Algerian authorities, who provided him with a villa and gave him travel privileges to North Korea and other socialist nations to garner support for the party. Even Yasser Arafat of the Palestinian Liberation Organization visited Algeria, bringing a caseload of AK-47s. Many African liberation organizations were offered headquarters and support from the Algerian government, including organizations from Angola, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe, but none of their offices compared to the compound provided for the Black Panther Party. At the party's compound, the international section of the Black Panther Party entertained revolutionary fighters from all over Africa and the Middle East. Panther Field Marshal Don Cox even attended a PLO training camp.
So, you as a young Panther leader, and just to remind people, at the age of 19, Aaron is forming and leading the Seattle chapter of the Black Panthers. So just, what impact did that have on everyday rank and file members and middle ranking members and leadership members in terms of you touched upon the political education. If you could just maybe expand a little bit more about how the global struggles influenced you and how the ideology of the global struggles and their leading ideologies that influenced the Panthers.
Well, one of the beautiful things about the Black Panther Party was the understanding of the whole international struggle. Because when we first started out, when people started rising up, there were a lot of black nationalist organizations. I was considered myself a black nationalist before I got involved in the party. Many of us were black nationalists. But, after we joined the party, we realized it was not just a black nationalist struggle. It was an international struggle. It was about struggle for people all over the world that wanted to overthrow this yoke of imperialism and capitalism. And so this really gave us a sense that we were part of a larger movement, a larger struggle. It wasn't just us struggling, that we were all struggling throughout the whole world. So that really, that was really important. Even though there were a lot of people, there were some people who still wanted to hold on to their black nationalism, but it just didn't fit into what the Black Panther Party was all about. Because one of the things that the Black Panther Party did better than anybody else was understand the importance of broad coalition building. And one of the first coalitions that they built was with the Peace and Freedom Party, which was a white leftist organization out of Southern California. And we went on to build coalitions with the Brown Berets, which was a Latino organization that also wore very similar uniforms to the Black Panther Party. The Red Guard, which was an Asian organization out of the Bay Area. The Young Patriot Party, which was poor whites from the Appalachian Mountains. And SDS and many other organizations, as well as the women's movement and the gay rights movement.
I wanted to continue on to the gender and sexism issues, which is kind of littered throughout your book. Not only your own personal ups and downs, and love and heartache, etc., and family issues, etc., but also the position of the Black Panther Party in relation to women. Now, I think the Panthers were one of the first black radical organizations in the United States to have comrade sisters in all members of the leadership and the membership as well. But obviously, the Panthers also recruited from the oppressed black community, and any people's organization will inevitably have in its organization some of the problems reflected in the community at large. And I just wanted you to kind of read out the passage, this quote on gender, which touches upon issues of sexism, but also of community organizing and the dynamics around that. And off that, we can perhaps just make some comments.
Okay. After Aaron Dixon helped in leading to set up the Black Panther Party in Seattle. Okay, let me just nix that. Mm-hmm. Our phones once we opened up our office, our phones were constantly ringing with people calling for help with landlord issues, spousal abuse, or problems with the police. In one single incident, a single mother with a house full of kids called to report that her landlord had removed her front door because she had fallen behind in the rent. We dispatched a squad of Panthers to the landlord's house. They secured the door, carried it down the street and to the woman's house and put it back on its hinges. We got frequent calls from women complaining about abuse from husbands or boyfriends. Usually a visit from a contingent of armed Panthers, the abuse would stop, at least for the time being. And we responded to constant calls about police harassment by showing up with armed Panthers to confront surprise police. The party's official position, set by the Central Committee, was that women were equal to men, and that women had the power to do anything a man can do. However, in day-to-day activity, things didn't always turn out that way. It was a constant struggle to change the thinking of men in the party. Well, let me first of all say that the women who did join the Black Panther Party were very tough women, and they didn't take no crap. Basically, they didn't take any crap. And the way that women got into the party was there was a young sister, 17 years old, who was a violinist as well as an artist. She walked by the Panther office one day and she saw these men in there, and she went in and said, "How come you don't have no sisters in here?" And Bobby Seale said to her, "Well, we got one now." And that's how women came into the Black Panther Party. But like I said, the women that did join the Black Panther Party were very tough, very strong, and they weren't weak women at all. And the party's policy was that women could do anything that men could do. They learned how to shoot, they learned how to fight, they learned how to organize, and they had played a predominant role on the newspaper, which was one of the most important aspects of the Black Panther Party was our newspaper. And you know, the party, when the party first started, it was made up of a lot of very rough and tough men who had been involved in street life and crime. But as the party began to open up by 1968, 1969, a lot of college students began to join the Black Panther Party, and a lot of these college students were women that came into the party.
I wanted, there's this, what you call my favorite quote from your book. I'll read out the quote, it's quite a long one.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's interesting that obviously you're an armed organization, and legally you had for a short amount of time the right to bear arms in self-defense until Reagan changed the law in California, and I think a similar thing happened in Seattle as well.
Yeah, in the state of Washington.
Right, and so obviously, if we look at our situation today, for example, in our communities, the first obstacle to real community organizing is not directly the ruling class and the ruling state, but it's the ruling state's sub-state organized crime against us. So stepping out into our communities, the first thing you're faced with is organized crime in relation to drugs and pimping. And so obviously to face that off, you require ideally a combined force of a organized and militant and disciplined community with a self-defense force of whatever kind that might be, because you can't face organized crime that has the backing and the collusion of the police and the state without that. Now obviously you guys had frankly a revolutionary black socialist army, essentially an armed force, and this is kind of illuminates that. So this is a extract from Aaron's book on page 193.
It's your favorite piece, so you
Thanks.
go read that.
Yeah. On a day-to-day basis in the community, we, the Panthers, often received pleas for help from upset mothers concerning their teenage daughters and pimps in the area. The Seattle-Tacoma region boasted Fort Lewis, one of the largest military bases on the West Coast, 2 Air Force bases. That's, by the way, our youngest member in the crowd today. Welcome, and to his parents as well. So, yeah, sorry. Elmer, who's one of your comrades.
My brother.
And your brother. Elmer and I knew a number of the girls who stood on the corners, soliciting. We had grown up with them, attended school with them. Whenever we saw any underage sisters down on Hostro, where the prostitutes strolled on Yesler Street, we sent them home. And because our community center, the Panther office, was near the Hostro, many of the prostitutes took refuge in our office when the police came down on them. Sometimes, at the request of the mothers, we went out in search of the daughters on the streets of Seattle or at a pimp's house. On occasion, pimps kidnapped young women and sent them to Utah to quote-unquote break them in. One day, a couple of comrade sisters came in from selling the Panther papers and told us they had been harassed by some pimps. So we sent a squad to where the pimps lived. The comrades broke down the door and administered some revolutionary justice. About a week later, we held a fundraising dance to benefit the medical clinic which Aaron and the Panthers had set up in Seattle. Toward the end of the event, Black Panthers Elmer, Anthony, Jack Fiddler and Valentine were doing a security check on the perimeter when Valentine spotted a young girl sitting in a gold Cadillac crying while a pimp with a big floppy hat sat at the wheel. Valentine leaned in. We spoke to Valentine last night on the phone. It was great to speak to him. Valentine leaned in and asked the girl what was wrong. He got into the car as she scooted over. She said, he won't let me leave. And then Valentine responded, you want to leave? You can leave. He won't do nothing. Watch. Valentine said, taking out his knife and began to slice up the leather interior of the pimp's car. The pimp showed no reaction because Elmer, on the other side, had a 9mm pointed at his head. Valentine took the young girl back to her mother. The next day, 5 Cadillacs of various colors pulled up to the community center. James, Redmond, Valentine, and I met them as they pulled up. We exchanged words as they voiced their anger at our interventions. I advised them to look up at the office windows, where they saw some heavy artillery looking down upon them. They took off. Shortly afterward, the troublesome pimps moved to Tacoma. Now, there's a lot of issues and threads there. The thing I wanted to pick up on was for ask you to reflect on the nature of your armed struggle, frankly, in the Panthers, and the power it gave you to negotiate power on a local level. And then what do you think is the applicability and relevance or not of that to the present struggle in the United States and more broadly?
Well, we used to say that power comes out of the barrel of a gun. And we understood that we had seen too many assassinations. We had seen Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X assassinated, and we weren't going to have any more assassinations. And so the gun became very important to us. But it did allow us to let people know who wanted to do the community harm that they had to deal with us first, and we weren't going to allow any harm to the community. And that's probably one of the most important aspects of what the Black Panther Party meant, is that we stood in between the community and any force that wanted to do the community harm. In terms of the second part of the question, I don't think you couldn't do that now in the U.S. You couldn't take up arms in that manner in the U.S. It's a completely different situation now. But what we also talked about was that power of the people. We used to say that brown power to brown people, red power to red people, yellow power to yellow people, white power to white people, and black power to black people. All power to the people. That the people do have, in the ultimate, the people do have the power to make the decisions of what happens in their community. So maybe you want to ask me some specific things.
Just to be blunt, with Ferguson, make it plain, as Malcolm would say. With the Ferguson situation and the associated rise of police brutality, which is perhaps clearly going on, or perhaps people are mobilizing more around it in the United States, I'm not sure exactly what it is. We have a similar situation here with the August uprising in 2011 and the way that's politicized people here as well, to some extent. There is some talk by people of arming up, basically, right? Now, I personally disagree with that humbly, because some people who advocate that I greatly respect. So really, that is what strategically do you think, with all your experience and then your comrades, what are the main challenges concretely today? Is it about organizing and arming up, or do you see the challenges in a different orientation?
Okay. Well, let me first say that that by us using weapons, in many ways, it led to our demise as well. That probably there should have been a time where we would have said, okay, we're going to get rid of the guns because we don't need them anymore. But in those early years, we did need them. And it's easy for somebody to say, yeah, we're going to arm up, I'm going to get a gun. But it's not that easy. It's not that simple. Because first of all, you got to be really ready to give your life. And that's one of the questions I get from young people all the time is, weren't you guys afraid? Weren't you scared? Yeah, we were scared, we were afraid, but we were ready to die. We were ready to die. There's no question about that. And there were over 30 members of the Black Panther Party that were killed by the police. And we were ready to defend ourselves. But I think, as I was saying earlier, first of all, I don't think people are really ready for that. And you wouldn't stand a chance. You would be wiped out so fast if you thought about taking up arms against the state. with the surveillance that they have, with the technology that they have, they had heavily infiltrated the Black Panther Party, and it led to the death of some very important people like Fred Hampton, who hopefully I'll have somebody else ask a question about that so I can talk about Fred Hampton, which was one of the greatest human beings that I ever met. But it boils down to what I said earlier. It really boils down to the fact that we have the power of if we can organize, if people came together. I think there's a lot of great examples that we can look at, particularly in South America, of people being able to organize and being able to take to the streets and getting their demands listened to. We can look at Bolivia. Bolivia was a country that was being colonized by America. The American corporations were taking over the water systems in Bolivia and many other things, and the people got to the point where they said, we're tired of this. So they took to the streets. They blocked the roads, they blocked the highways, they stopped all commerce from moving, they burnt tires on the roads, and this was such a force that they caused the president of Bolivia to leave office. And it led to the election of Evo Morales, the first indigenous cocoa farmer, I might add, a cocoa farmer who became president of Bolivia. And this could not have happened without the people taking to the streets and blocking commerce. Because when you block commerce and stop their ability to make their money, then you've caught their attention. And they've done this in other places in South America as well. So it really is about the power of the people and the people coming together and organizing and talking to people and getting people to unite. And I always tell people, if we had 1 million man march. We had supposedly 1 million people out on the streets in D.C. Well, really, that wasn't nothing. That wasn't nothing, because those 1 million people, those 1 million men, whatever they were, they should have said, we ain't going nowhere. We ain't going nowhere. We're going to block these streets. We're going to surround the White House. We're going to surround the Congress, and ain't nothing moving. Because they can't arrest 1 million people. They can't arrest 50,000 people, And when the people power expresses itself like that, they have to take notice. They have to listen.
Beautifully said. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to take 3 contributions at a time, if that's okay. You know what they say, keep it brief. I don't really mind if you talk a bit long, as long as it's not utterly boring or sectarian, because people have a legitimate, a right to contribute to the conversation. I see you, Felix. Anyone else apart from Felix? Felix, you want to start off, please? Go for it.
Yeah. So, for lack of an actual question, it's more like what are your comments on. I suppose I became politicized with the student protests for tuition fees in 2008, I think. And that was a case where, like, in the protest, we just didn't move, kind of like what you were saying. And as much as the media wanted to paint it another way, we knew that they were catching attention, even though nothing actually happened. They just raised it anyway. And I guess I'm just kind of voicing the opinion of me and many people, my peers, that, I don't know, maybe I just haven't seen the power that demonstrating can do, but like I don't vote because I don't think that's got no power. I'll go on a march and a demonstration, but not because I believe that it will make real change. So to everyone like me, what words of kind of encouragement do you have, or I don't know, maybe redirection or something, I don't know.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Felix. And other people can also join, it doesn't have to be just you ask a question that Aaron responds. If people have gotten their opinion on what Felix or anyone else says, this is a collective conversation where we have, special guest speaker Aaron, and also we have George and other people who are active and veterans and younger people. Is there anyone else who would want to come in to say, ask something before Aaron responds to that? Please.
Yes, at the moment we've got Al Sharpton, who's come over here. What do you think about that? Do you think he's a motivating force, or do you think it could be a bad idea? Because I do. I think it could be a bad idea.
Let me answer. Let me try to get to the first question. You know, when they started having the demonstrations against the war in Iraq, you know, they had them all throughout the country and all throughout the U.S. and the world. But a friend of mine surmised it up this way. She said these are boutique demonstrations. And that's what they were. You know, people came out for a Saturday, they demonstrated, and they went home or went to the movies or had tea or whatever. So the demonstrations like that have no effect. You know, they have no effect.
We do have some for young people who are not politically astute.
That's true.
It's an introduction.
That's true.
Into an area where lots of people are.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Sometimes these things can influence young people.
That's
but
true.
Only a small amount.
Yeah. And when we had demonstrations back in, you know, in the 60s and 70s, you know, the demonstrations were a very wide lot of different people, you know, because we had built coalitions and we had what was called United Front Against Fascism. We could call a demonstration. There would be 50,000 people out there. And so it had a lot more energy, it had a different feel. You know, people were ready to tear the city up or whatever, you know. But you know, it's different now. It's different now from when I was growing up. When I was growing up, things were really very communal. People were really close, and really communities were close, families were close, and people had a different level of commitment. Now it's a very individualistic, very narcissistic, and they've done that on purpose. You know, they pushed that in the 70s. They pushed this individualism, this narcissism, because when you have an individual type of mentality, then there's no way that you can think about giving your life up for the struggle, you know. If you have a communal way of thinking, if you're connected to your community and your family and to other people, then you have more of an urgency of willing to give your life up. So it's a totally different situation now. And then you have people like Al Sharpton who come on the scene and who water down everything. You know, they water down the young people. They water down the anger of the young people, and they don't allow the young people to really express themselves. I think Al Sharpton is very, very detrimental to any movement or any struggle really being able to develop in the U.S. And the young people of Ferguson have told him, you know, we don't want you. You can't come in here and lead us or take over our demonstration. Al Sharpton functions the same way as Abbas does for the Palestinian people, you know, to supposedly represent them, but at the same time hold them back and hold them down.
I'm going to bring George. I'd just like to ask you all to welcome George. I'm sorry to embarrass you, George, but I'm not embarrassed at all for introducing George, because George is one of our most precious and valued comrades who is currently residing in our city, the heart of whiteness and neocolonialism that is London. George sacrificed much of his life and has got the scars to show it, both metaphorically and literally, in the liberation of a land in the southern part of Africa, which was colonized by one of the biggest genocidal maniacs ever known to humanity, which is called Cecil Rhodes. And so narcissistic was he that he named several African countries after himself, and one of which was today's Zimbabwe, which George and his comrades in Zimbabwe helped to liberate. So please welcome George, who's going to say a few words today.
I don't know whether I'm going to be able to live up to that, but two things or three things made me think I might have a small axe to make. The first is straight off from what we just been talking about. Is Al Sharpton is Don King with a pen. That's one way of thinking about it. And I don't that there is something in that remark I'm trying to get at, which is we need to reflect on the way in which black politics, or what used to be called black politics, in this country, has become a kind of privatized. Yeah? And I think that came to my mind literally in the last wave of civil disorders in this city and elsewhere, where suddenly those people who used to speak from the side of those communities were now consultants. Okay? And you found a lot of young people confronted by the violence of the police without anybody else to speak for them. Okay? So for me, it's not because they don't understand the history, right? It's rather that memory has gone somewhere else. And that's the reality of this country. Another remark I wanted to make is that, especially in the last 2 or 3 days, everybody's kind of, in one part, kind of celebrating Syriza in Greece. And at the same time, that very moment, they are quoting a very far-right organization which has brought misery and violence to black bodies. Right? And I'm left with a feeling the way in which we're sort of like convenient fodder at particular moments of time. Right? The third argument I want to make is really is the remark we're talking about the place of violence. You know, I don't have a fetish about violence. You know, I really don't. And I think there's been a kind of very historical misreading of what the place of violence is. The thing about coloniality, the thing about colonialism is it's such a violent, totally violent thing that you couldn't possibly talk it away. Eh? You can't talk it away. That is not the same as simply saying, let's just do violence. Eh? That's a very, very different thing altogether. By declaring that we were our own liberators, yes, was to try and empower ourselves in the process of that liberation, which is not exactly the same as say, just go and buy some guns. You know, those are two different things altogether. Now, I say that because of what is happening in the Middle East. Okay, well, I worry about that term Middle East. It's not in. I don't know what Middle East means. I mean, yeah, there's something about. I mean, who gives these kinds of names? But that's for another. That's for another day. But I just worry about the way in which the production and circulation of violence has become to stand in the way of people finding their own sense of self, okay? And how that cycle of violence is for the most part used against us. The inspiration my generation in colonial Rhodesia got from the Black Panther, okay, in many ways was stylistically cultural. Okay? There was a different way of looking black. Okay? There was a different way of imagining yourself. Okay? I would never have become a Hendrix fan if it was these guys. But Jimmy, in our hands in Zimbabwe, was a way of getting at the square Rhodesians, square South Africans, who thought they were the modern. Okay? So it was to do with finding a way of being in the modern world with a difference, with an attitude, if you like. And that kind of attitudinal moment is what we borrowed from these guys. Where we are now, funny enough, 30 years ago, one way of identifying yourself as radical was to be connected with national liberation movements or independence movements or what is going on in the global south. Now, you know, Britain is the fountainhead of neoliberalism. It's manufactured here and exported somewhere else. Right? Neoliberalism is the revenge to independence, independence and liberation movement.
Exactly.
So in a way, I want us to talk about, if you like, for want of a better word, not post-independence, if you like, liberation Mark II.
That's right.
Okay? With the same decisiveness as independence used to have. Why? Because now neoliberalism hasn't been exported out there. It's created so much misery. No one in their sane mind would want to be associated with Africa in the moment in which it is now. But we need to be associated with it if you think of it in that Mark II I'm talking about.
That's right.
And to understand that Mark II, you have to understand what the place of violence, who is being violated. Why is it so easy for the United States to be able to see 2 or 3 people crossing the Soviet Union into Ukraine, okay, with their satellite stuff, and unable to see 200 people, 200 girls in Nigeria? Why is it? Those are the kinds of, why is it that 2017 people die in Paris, and I'm not suggesting they shouldn't have done, the world goes on its knees. The importance of returning to the moment of the Black Panther is in part to share that collective history, to share that collective memory, but reposition it in the present. Okay? What C.L.R. James used to call the problem space. We need to think the present in a slightly different way from which we did before. If we continue to think about it the way we did it 30 years ago, we stuck, we finished before we even begin. So, Don King with a perm is something else. Okay? It won't surprise me that people will want to play the photo shoot with him, but in real terms, it makes no difference whatsoever. In real terms, nobody is going to talk about the possibility of a Syriza in Britain. I would like to see one, but I would like to see one that is rooted in the colony here, us.
What's the word you just used?
Syriza is this stuff, the party that just won elections in Greece. The importance of that is the way in which issues like austerity, for example, are the material ground in which all our lives in this room are lived. Right? And any movement that says something about that construct the spaces in which solidarities might be built is precisely at the moment in which we think there is a gain, it turns its head towards solidarity with a far-right organization. That's the danger. And that's the scariest of things. And in a way, the debate about race and immigration in this country is classic in that way. And it's classic in the sense that those are the moments in which it becomes reconnected very much with what's going on in the global south. So we need to find a way of learning from that collective memory in order for us to function politically now in the year present. In that context, I'm actually quite encouraged by the amount of enthusiasm, interest in both, if you like, as an old radical of a sort, left discourse on one end, but also decolonial questions properly, not as a sort of like part of my CV, but something that is lived. And I think there is I think you should be proud of yourself as a generation that, people you're beginning to have an interest in the way things are and finding those connections and working from them.
Thank you, George. So the conversation thus far has become rightly quite complex and is touching upon the general challenges we find ourselves in within this thing called the West, right? And the way I want to bring Aaron back into this is this. Now, the challenge in the West is this. It's clearly there's a polarizing effect. Most of the polarizing is going in the rightward direction. I think that's very, very clear. Throughout all of Europe and North America, the radical movements and capacity are not expanding their strategic power, but it's the right, and that's manifest in the United States with the Tea Party movement, I suppose. And the Tea Party in their attack on Obama and then colonially racializing Obama, literally as a monkey in some regards on their placards in the Tea Party. It's a white supremacist kind of reactive, we cannot have any change. I mean, I think the system is quite clever. They're putting a black face on the system to make it more acceptable, to give it more longevity as it's stepping into a existential crisis in the globe. So I think that's interesting. But I think to ask Aaron the question, how do you see the outlook? Because just a small comment on Greece. I mean, you've got a rising far right, and Greece is one of the most radical countries in Europe, if it's in Europe at all, which is arguable. It straddles Europe and the non-European sphere. But how do you see things playing themselves out with an ascendant kind of reactive right wing, and then a very small, relatively radical movement of brown and black people and working class people and anti-imperialists? How do you see that all panning out?
Well, let me first say that that the uprising in Ferguson was a pleasant surprise. And I think it's important for us to take note that while Ferguson was happening, also what was happening was the attack on Gaza and Hamas repelling the IDF. And both of those incidents are not separate, because one of the things that happened was that the women in Gaza started tweeting the activists in Ferguson about how to deal with the tear gas. And the next thing you know, you see the activists in Ferguson marching, saying something like, "Free Gaza, free Gaza," and that was never happened before. It never was on the mind of black people that there was a connection between the Palestinian struggle and the black struggle in America. So I think it's been really a pleasant surprise that struggle broke out and that connection began to happen. But also, what's happening is south of the border of the United States is the struggle of people in Mexico that have begun to uprise and are demanding that the president of Mexico be ousted because of what he's doing, because of the murders. And they have seen the connection that the U.S. is supplying these billions of dollars a year to the Mexican army, which is going to the police, which is going to the cartels, and that it's been connected that this is happening, and that the U.S. is supplying $2 billion a year to IDF to oppress the Palestinians. So these connections are being made for the first time. And we used to say in the party that revolution is a process, that the movement is a process, that you can't go from A to Z. You have to go from A, B, C, D. And starting with the Occupy movement, I think starting with the Occupy movement was really a tremendous starting point. Even though the Occupy movement didn't last that long and they came down really hard on the people who were occupying these spaces across the country, but it put it into the mind of the 99%, that there's 99% of the people and there's 1% of the people that control the wealth. And for the first time, we started thinking about that. People all over the country started thinking about that. And you see bumper stickers that say, "I am the 99%. And in Ferguson now, we have illuminated the fact. I mean, this police brutality has been going on for so long, but now it has been illuminated that police brutality, that every 1.5 or 2 days a black male is killed. And so now it's black bodies matter. Black people matter. They're saying that, hey, we matter. And they have put this into the minds of the American people. And a lot of these demonstrations, it's just not all black people. It's white, it's white people, it's Latinos, it's Muslims that have come out on the street and say that black lives matter. So I think it's really very promising what is happening, not just in America, but what's happening in the world in terms of people are waking up and they're connecting these movements, and they're seeing that this is a worldwide phenomenon about what's taking place.
Thank you, sir. Yes, please, sister.
You mentioned actually about the whole Charlie Hebdo thing. There are a lot of people who are, I guess, angry about the level of coverage that particular incident got in direct comparison to the 2,000 people in Nigeria. Now, obviously one of the main things that you even said, Aaron, was important during the major Black Panther movement was the media and the newspapers that were written, I would say maybe by you guys, for you guys, if you get what I mean. Would you say it's so important for us suppressed or the oppressed people to look for media coverage by the people who are oppressing them? Does it make sense that we are looking for that kind of coverage? Because I don't understand why you would be in full knowledge that they are oppressing these people, but yet you want them to cover the news of them struggling. I don't understand that. So I don't know what your comments are on that. Should we not be sharing it amongst as many people as possible, but amongst the people who actually care? Why do we want them to cover that? What would you say on that
Yeah, that's a
topic?
very good point.
Did you guys on the back get that? Yeah, cool.
Well, that's a great point, because in the party we used to say that the power is the ability to define phenomena and make it act in the desired manner. So whoever is defining the phenomena that is taking place, they are the ones that have the power. And this is why our newspaper was so important. This is why every Panther had to go out and sell 100 papers a day, and we had a circulation of 350,000 papers worldwide. And this is why we spent so much time on that newspaper, because we wanted to define ourselves the phenomena that was happening in our community. We couldn't leave it up to somebody else to define it. And by us being able to define it, that gave us the power to make the changes in our community. So, and you know, the media is run by the corporations. You know, they define everything in our lives. So for us to just realize, to just concentrate on the mass media that comes out and not realize that we have to find other ways of defining it ourselves and not leaving it up to them, is very important. Of course, we have social media today, you know, which plays a big role. But I think we got to figure out ways to take it even further than that, so that we can define ourselves. I mean, just like you said, what happened in France, you know, how the media defined that. I mean, it was just so, like, they just were just looking at one thing, you know, and it just ticked me off. It ticked everybody else off. You know, they talked about the violence in France, but what about the violence that France and other colonial powers have committed on other people throughout the world?
If I knew the right media form place, institution in which everything was wonderful, believe me, I'll tell you. Okay, but I need to say it's not like that. Okay, so in that sense, I have a double relation with what I call a double relation with the media. Okay? One part of that work is to indulge in a kind of literacy work about how we are produced by the media. It is not as obvious as it seems. Nobody is born aware of what is going on in the metro. Yeah? You have to kind of like learn how to find out who is the subject who's being talked about. Who's setting, not just who, the setting of a conversation in itself sets out where it is. Okay? Syriza is called far left. Now, to most British people, the minute someone says far left, it comes up with all sorts of images people think with. Okay? And it's that kind of work. And doing that kind of work, you can't but not pay attention to what's going on in the mainstream media. And the good thing about that, what emerges as a result of that, people begin to question the information, the literature that's put in around them. The other point I'll make is the BBC's coverage of Gaza. I mean, it's just like horrendous. But the more they got the way in which they did, the more it actually enabled people to say, hang on a minute, why is the BBC doing this? We pay for it. What might we do? Okay, so doing media work is not the same as where do you read. They're two different things. We are at our peril if we ignore doing media work, because in paying attention to media work, we find out how we are represented. Okay? We're beginning to find ways, imaginative ways, in which we might bend the twig somewhat, if ever. And I end by this. The last 15 or so years have been the most... If someone would ask me to replay, to go back to year 2000 and say to you, George, are you going to say something about Zimbabwe? I would have gone away. I would have said no. Okay. I just intervened because I couldn't bear the way in which... Zimbabwe is not Baghdad. It's not Los Angeles either. But sometimes I feel people, if you say Robert Mugabe, some people use that name to frighten their children or their grandmothers. I intervened because I wanted to say something else. And I became Mark. So now, I said, George Sherry, it immediately becomes that. Nobody actually knows. I'm much more interested in visual culture. Yeah, that's what I do. Actually, I spend most of my time supervising students to read about images. Most people think I only talk about Bobby. Well, he's my father, so to speak. But I had to come into that discussion because the kind of Zimbabwe that was being talked about in the media, you would think it's Armageddon. I said to somebody yesterday, you can have Perrier water in Harare, They said, what? They didn't, that's what I call doing media work. I wasn't saying Robert Mugabe is good or bad. I just say there's something about representation. And I said something about, the last conversation we had, I suddenly said, well, we are all Palestinians now. And, there is a way in which most of us in this room are already imagined to be terrorists and bombers and so on. The construction of who we are or have become is part and parcel of doing media work. So it's very, very important we situate what the struggle about media is, over and above owning our own forms of representation, if you're rich enough to be able to do so, It is that subject formation work that is important and very serious. And for me, as I said earlier, we learned it from these guys. We knew we didn't want to be represented by the Rhodesians and as simply, garden boys and nannies and cleaning their shoes. We wanted a different kind of identification. We wanted a different kind of subjectivity. We wanted a way of positioning ourselves in the world. And it gave us a way of talking ourselves as subject in the modern world. And that's a very interesting way of thinking about how media work can be done.
Thanks for that, George. Before I ask Sakib to come in, just wanted to make... my bad. I'll ask you then Sakib. Just a few comments on Paris and Nigeria, etc. Now, listen. What the French and the British and the United States are doing to Syria and Libya is the same thing that happened in Paris. But when it happens to Syria and Libya, it's an Arab Spring, it's a revolution, it's fighting a tyrant. But the same exact people that they're unleashing against Libya and Syria, when they come and do to Parisians what they're doing day in, day out in Nigeria, in Somalia, in Libya and Syria, then it becomes a problem. Then it becomes a massacre. But these abductions are going on every day in Libya and Syria and Mali and Somalia and Afghanistan and Pakistan and Nigeria and Libya. They go on every single day. Today, the Corinthia Hotel in Tripoli, Libya, has been attacked by an ISIS-affiliated group who's killed about a dozen people, blown themselves up. There's no comment about it in the mainstream. It's not on the front pages. Our lives are not worth anything in that white supremacist kind of framing of our own people. And so Boko Haram in Nigeria, who do you think is behind dividing Nigeria and traumatizing it? Do you think it's just Africans? Do you think that the most mineral-rich country of oil on the African continent, where there's major British oil interests, Royal Dutch Shell and American oil interests, have got no indirect or direct hand to play in developing this trauma in Nigeria? Well, of course they have. And it touches upon what George said about the old liberation struggle violence being remixed and repackaged today by the system itself to project out as terrorism with the cover of revolution and uprising, right? So these are quite complex issues that we have to deconstruct and understand. I think we should actually have a separate conference just on violence, and we should show the documentary concerning violence, because that's a beautiful documentary, but I'm not sure people are interpreting that and applying that in the way that the violence was used in those liberation struggles. Because the system is using the old iconography of the violence of the liberation struggles to promote their own terrorism across our countries. It's quite a very sophisticated operation.
Okay, mine was more kind of a point rather than a question. I grew up in the 70s and 80s and inspired by Black Panthers and Malcolm X in particular. Those who know me know that I'm deeply pragmatic at heart. And what I took and others took was the program and the plan that you just mentioned. in particular, the kind of the breakfast club, providing breakfast for children, developing youth facilities, developing programs. We identified in the 70s and 80s there were issues. And, you know, we couldn't look to the state, we had to look to ourselves. What the state managed to do in the 80s was destroy those movements. And in particular, I'm talking about the Asian youth movements, right? Autonomous youth clubs, autonomous youth projects, all around the country were literally destroyed. In many ways, in the same way that the Panthers were destroyed, through infiltration, through withdrawing of funds, through deliberate destruction of those kinds of projects and the taking out of workers one way or another. But the other thing we took inspiration from, and this is in my later days, is we have deaths in custody and police brutality visited on us in this country every day, every week. We've had a guy who was handcuffed and somehow fell off a building in Kilburn, just before Christmas. Last year in 2014, there were 230 deaths in custody, in prisons, and immigration detention in this country. Many of them people of colour, many of them Muslims, many of them African Caribbean descent. And so we have problems here on our doorstep. And one of the things, again, we've taken kind of inspiration from, I'm involved with a family justice campaign, is that whenever there's a death or a brutality that's visited on us, is that we go outside the police station. Yeah. We don't ask for permission. We just go outside the police station and we make some noise.
Love that.
And we make some fury.
Energy,
right?
Because at the end of the day, they turn around and they keep the individual people who were in pain hanging on for 5 years.
Yeah.
5 years because they see it as an attack on the state.
But
that's how wicked they are.
But that's all we have to do.
Do.
We're going through all the due processes, IPCC court, CPS, or whatever. But I think the key thing for us is that we've got to make sure people are asking what to do. I think there was a guy here, Felix, saying is that, look, we need to be going outside the police stations and we need to be not leaving till we get answers. And that's a kind of revolutionary culture that we need to be going back to and building. I
just to throw that straight back at you, Saqib.
Yeah.
So what you're saying? How do you do that? Because Saqib, Aaron, you're visiting. Saqib is a good comrade. He's solid. So how do you suggest we develop that culture?
I think we need to go back to our young people and children. The supplementary schools that we have here, even the classes that we've been kind of looking at, is that we need to bring that culture up within our children and young people.
All the time. We always must begin with a specific case. And each case, whatever it is, will teach you things. It will of necessity take you to something wider. Okay? Not the grand theory first, but start there, and it will take you to the grand theory. Okay? And the very idea of just knowing someone has been busted around the corner itself is a case to begin with. We need to find it in ourselves to defend ourselves, as not just being defensive, but also as a form of liberation. As a form of resistance, liberation comes together. So we start with the things that we live with. It might be a rent strike, it might be an abusive neighbor, any one of these things, they tend to be connected. They are not operating in a silo. They feed off from the same colonial setting. They feed off from the same disease. And we do need to reclaim that spirit of resistance, liberation, as a way of life, not just being on the fence. And it's in that form. I don't know how to live on the planet on my own. Okay? I don't know. I'm not a complete subject. I don't know how to love myself. What do I mean? I don't know how to kiss myself. I don't know how to kiss somebody else. I don't know how to be in a world in which just me. Multiplicity is a concept that I know of. Movement in history is something that I know of. Multiple ideas is something that I know of. Living with other people is something I know of. Struggling with others is something I know of. I don't know of this sort of single individualized subject that has become the defining theme of neoliberal times. So we need to kind of break away from thinking that we're powerless in that sense by specifically starting from things as they exist, not as I would like them to be, yes, as they exist, and take it that way, and take our communities with us. That's how you begin to see something of a political strategy program emerging. It starts from a very specific case into something larger.
Thanks, George. So, Aaron, just I see your hand up. Got this brother here, then yourself. Aaron, the question was, why did J. Edgar Hoover roll out the strategy that the Panthers were public enemy number one? And perhaps that's a way for you to talk about the repression that you, the nature of the repression that you faced.
Well, it was because when we really started developing broad coalitions and start working with the Native American community and start working with the Latino community and start working with the poor white community and really started creating this broader movement is when we really became a threat. And even more so when we started the breakfast program, when we started the medical clinic, when we started the free food program and the busing the prisons program. They really began to attack the Black Panther Party. As a matter of fact, when the breakfast program started, in places like Los Angeles and in Chicago and other places, they actually came in with shotguns at the breakfast program to intimidate the kids, to stop them from coming. So, I think that's one of the main reasons is we had a very broader movement and we were connected with other movements throughout the world, that they began to institute what was called the COINTEL program, and began to kill certain people like Fred Hampton in Chicago, who was head of the Chicago chapter, and the Chicago chapter never recovered from the death of Fred Hampton. And Fred Hampton was somebody special. There was a memo that came out that we had gotten hold of years before the party had even started, and in that memo it came out by the FBI that if a black messiah is discovered, he is to be assassinated. And Fred Hampton definitely was that black messiah. In LA there was Bunchy Carter, who was head of before he joined the party, he was head of the largest gang in LA called the Slawsons, and he left the gang and joined the Black Panther Party, and he became a target. And they began to pick off leaders of the Black Panther Party all across the country. And there never was a time when all of the leadership was not either in exile or not dead or not in prison, where they could come together and plan and work on things. And we got to the point we had to fortify our offices. We got orders to move out of storefronts and open up community centers in the middle of neighborhoods, so it would make it more difficult for them to raid and attack our office. And if they did that, they were going to affect the community as well. And we had to sandbag our offices. Many of our offices were heavily sandbagged and with steel on the doors, and we had to have security around the clock, so that we could be prepared for anything that might happen. So it probably was the greatest violence that was perpetrated on an organization in America, and in the history of America.
Thanks for that, Aaron. I just want to ask you as well, before I ask the others to come in. Time's flying by, it's 8:20. I want to wrap this up in the next 15-20 minutes max, so we've unfortunately got about 4 books of Aaron. The publishers didn't manage to get more books over to us. So obviously they'll be sold and you can do the signing and you'll have a chance to chat with Aaron for 20 minutes, half an hour or so. Just before I ask the others to step in with their... Just again, the discussion was around our challenge today. Like, we're facing this organizing around police, around housing, around racism in general, foreign policy. I mean, what would be your concrete step-by-step advice to the activists who are coming into that kind of radical scene?
I don't know if I could give a step-by-step, but what I would agree very much what he just said is that you got to start somewhere. You got to start at a specific point. And I think, by the young people in Ferguson doing what they did and finally realizing that they're going to have to take some action and step up and say something. And just by them doing that, by them taking that step, this movement has grown into a national phenomena. And as I said earlier, that it is a process. A lot of times we get discouraged. We get discouraged when things aren't happening fast enough, they're not happening big enough. But it's the spirit of the people, and it's the power of the people. That we have to think about our children and our kids. What type of future do we want to have for our children and our kids? And if we don't step up now and speak out and organize and demonstrate, and then there's not going to be any change. It's up to us to make the change, and that and also start exactly what he said. We have to really think about this individualism that has been put on us, and really start throwing that off. Just like he said, yeah, I can love myself, but what good is that going to do? Like a selfie. What does a selfie mean? You took a picture, 1,000 pictures of yourself? What the heck does that mean?
They're not as handsome as you, Aaron.
Let's take pictures of our community. Let's take pictures of people in our community. Let's take and post that. Let's take pictures of injustice. Let's take pictures of family and community getting together. It's not about us individually. That's what they're trying to make us think. It's about us as a whole, as a human race, as the family of the earth, and that we are going to come together. That we are going to. There's way more of us than them. Way more of us, and that means that sometimes we have to, sitting on the bus, we're going to sit down and talk to somebody. And when I'm walking down the street, somebody looks me in the eyes, I always say hello. Whether they say anything back to me, that doesn't matter. If I'm in the store and I'm buying something, I always ask, I say, how are you doing today? How's your day? And people sometimes are shocked. People are shocked, But, it's those type of little things that we have to start building community again, and building relationships with people walking down the street. Because now, you get on a plane and you go into a restaurant, everybody's got their hand in the screen. Nobody's looking up at you, So we have to fight against that, because they're doing that on purpose. They're providing us with all this crap on purpose. And we have to fight against that. We have to learn to love not just ourselves. We got to love the people next to us. The people that live next door. I remember growing up where you could, if you didn't have any eggs in the house, you just went next door. Can I borrow an egg? Can I borrow a cup of sugar? Can I borrow some salt? Now people don't want to do that. They feel embarrassed about doing that, or they feel uncomfortable about doing that, but we should not feel that way.
Thank you, sir. So we have this brother here and the next brother, and listen, please keep your contributions short and succinct because of the time constraint, because I want to bring in another several people. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to let you guys speak for the next 10 minutes or so, and then Aaron and I will wrap up, so please.
Yeah, it's a very quick question. You mentioned selfies, individualism, consumerism. Just curious to hear your opinions or views about modern black rap culture and its effect on, say, black communities in America, or the black movement in America, or for that matter in Europe as well.
Yeah. I mentioned him a couple of times, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Fred Hampton, about what was it that made him such a prolific comrade and such a incredible person, and what do you think that we could learn from him, like as an individual, because he was an incredible individual, I think.
When organising movements against the oppressive systems that are in place, do you feel that I just wanted to know what the feelings were. Do you feel that it's important to do things openly, publicly? If they're done publicly and openly, where anyone can have access to know exactly this is what the plan is, this is what the method of attack is going to be, do you feel there's a danger of infiltration, so it will be just a movement that doesn't actually reach any sort of pace or have any effect? And do you feel that the opposite, doing things anonymously, doing things tactile secretly has the danger of not reaching enough people to actually take part in. I just wanted to know what the general thought was on that.
Thanks for that, bro. I appreciate it. So basically, clandestine and open work, and the
Yeah.
tensions around those two. Thank you. There was another hand up somewhere. Yes, Felix again.
I was going to ask, just if you could elaborate on when you were 19 and you were setting up the Seattle chapter of the Black Panthers, I suppose some of the advice and kind of foundations that were given to you by the Black Panthers elsewhere, and what, you know, how the practical kind of things with setting up something like that for you back then.
Thanks, Corey. Is there anyone else? I think this is the last opportunity to... Yes, please, Jim. And then Margaret again. Yeah.
You mentioned coalition building. It seems to me that's incredibly important if you're going to change anything, to bring enough people together. But the thing about coalitions is you have to form coalitions with people who aren't exactly the same as you, who disagree with you on things and whatever. Given it was so important for the Black Panthers to build those coalitions, how did they treat their allies? How, you know, when there were disagreements, how did you persuade people? Did you let things slide? Whatever. It seems like a really important question for anyone organising anything these days. Is how you work with people who don't agree with you.
Thanks, Jim. Margaret?
So currently where I work, it's like a floor of say 100 people. I'm the only black girl who works there. I'm with the agreement of the brother. Well, I believe in sharing. If someone asks what book are you reading, I'll tell them. So I was reading Asata Shakur, and as some of you know, the front cover is of her with her afro. Some colleague came up to me, "Oh, do you always read scary books?" Yeah.
I hope you laughed at him.
So then my advice is, well, not my advice, my question is, should I keep those kind of things public or private?
Well, when rap music first started in the late 70s and early 80s, you know, a lot of them were educated by the Black Panther Party and the movement. And so a lot of rap music was kind of took off where the Black Panther Party left off. They were talking about what was going on in the community. They were talking about political things and social conditions. And, you know, the powers that be recognized the power of rap music, and so they sought to circumvent that, and so they began to create and began to take control over the airways. First of all, they stopped playing politically oriented and socially conscious rap music, and then they began to take over the people that were coming in and telling them that, okay, we're going to sign you to this multi-million-dollar contract, but you can't say this, you can't say that. You know, we want you to, and so when they came up with the song, and if it was politically conscious, they said, no, that's not what we want. We want to hear bitches and hoes. We want to hear niggers and gangster crap. That's what the industry was telling the rappers that were coming in, that's what they wanted to hear. And if they didn't produce that type of music, then they did not get a contract. But of course we were moving into a very materialistic era, you know, where it was the bling bling, the money, the cars, and materialism was really beginning to take over the way a lot of Americans thought. And so these young people, they wanted to make money. And so in order for them to make money, they had to produce the type of music that the industry wanted them to produce. And it had a very negative influence on America. Not only that, they started producing these shows like Cops, and they were running these shows on almost all the channels and running them, you know, 2 or 3 times a day that portrayed black people as ignorant and lazy and gangsters and thugs. They came up with other shows, American Gangster, you know, portraying these young black people as thugs and hoodlums and portraying what they were doing as violent and crazy and insane. And they were, you know, they came up with this other show that they were always showing American prisons, and most of the time it was black and Latino people that they were showing in prisons, and they were showing these things all the time, and so they had a tremendous effect on how black people and young black people start looking at themselves, and it really has had a very negative effect. So that's kind of what happened with rap music. Now a lot of rappers now are producing conscious music because they have other ways of that music being played. It doesn't matter that it's not going to be played on the radio. They know that, but they know that they can get it out there anyway. So there is a lot of conscious rap music that is out there, and it is having a very positive influence.
Thank you, sir. Fred Hampton.
Fred Hampton. I got a chance to meet Fred Hampton when I was 19 years old. Fred Hampton used to, when he was growing up, he used to practice the speeches of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. He used to stand in front of the mirror and practice these speeches. He marched with Martin Luther King when he was very young. When he was in the high school, he organized the students in his high school because he recognized there were no teachers of color. He organized his kids in his high school to demand teachers of color, and they got that. The other thing that Fred Hampton might be surprising is he organized the community to demand that the police get higher salaries. Because Fred Hampton was he was a humanist. He was a lover of human beings, and he said, okay, well, if the police don't have enough money to do their job, then we need to get more funds for them to do the right job. Okay, so after Martin Luther King was killed, Fred Hampton joined the Black Panther Party. And when people heard him speak, they heard Malcolm and Martin Luther King all rolled into one. And he became a revolutionary. And Che Guevara says that a revolutionary is guided by great love. Well, Fred Hampton was a prime example of that. He was a lover of people. He dedicated himself to fighting for people. He dedicated himself to the Black Panther Party. He worked so hard. He worked so often and so much that his comrades actually had to tie him down in a chair. So he could get some rest. That's what Fred Hampton was all about. And when he spoke, he inspired people. Everybody who heard him speak was inspired by him. There were a group of lawyers who had just graduated from law school, and they heard about him at this church. He was giving a speech. They went down to hear him speak. And after they heard him speak, they joined up in the movement, and they started the People's Law Office, which is still open today. So Fred Hampton was just, like I said, it was the saddest day of my life when I got the phone call that Fred Hampton had been killed, because I knew that they had killed the next great leader of Black America.
Thank you, sir. Secret or open political work?
Well, we can't get caught up in trying to be secretive. I think of course they're going to infiltrate our meetings. They're going to infiltrate, our organizations. But first of all, we're not doing anything illegal. And that's the one thing that if you're going to do something illegal, then yeah, maybe you want to just keep it between one or two people. But if you're not doing anything illegal, there's no need in trying to keep everything secretive, because you have to go out and organize and talk to people. And you can't be paranoid. You can't be paranoid of the person next to you. So paranoid to the fact that you're not communicating, you're not talking, or so-and-so's a pig, or so-and-so's a snitch, and that presents a whole bunch of problems within itself, you have to you got to trust your instincts, you got to trust your intuition, and this is about a people's movement. This is about organizing and talking to people and getting people to come together. If they want to try to infiltrate that and make something out of that, then let them try. But also you have to be aware that they're going to try to circumvent what you're doing. You have to be wise enough, you have to be smart enough to know if somebody's going to come in and try to change what you're doing and make it into another direction, and be able to deal with that and be able to handle that in an open manner.
How did you build coalitions?
Coalitions?
And how did you deal with them?
Well, first of all, the Black Panther Party was the vanguard. We were the vanguard of the movement. So, but we said that anybody who is oppressed is our ally, is our friend. So we reached out to a lot of different people, a lot of different organizations. Now, Fred Hampton in Chicago, one of the first things he did was he went down to the two largest gangs in America, the Black Gangster Disciples and the Blackstone Rangers. And he told them, hey, we got to stop fighting each other. Either you guys join up with us and stop fighting each other, or you have to deal with us. And of course the FBI heard about this, and they stopped one of the gangs from joining up. But the Black Gangster Disciples joined up with the Black Panther Party and began to work with the Black Panther Party. And the next thing Fred Hampton did was he met Cha-Cha Jimenez, head of the Puerto Rican gang in Chicago. He said, Cha-Cha, why don't you change your gang into a political organization? Cha-Cha said, yeah. And then he went down to the poor white community, and he met with the activists down there and said, let's start working together. And they created the Rainbow Coalition. That was Fred Hampton that started the Rainbow Coalition, not Jesse Jackson. So we made an effort to go out because we knew there was more power when we developed coalitions with other people. Now there were organizations that had different ideologies than us, and they tried to interfere with what we were doing and tried to disrupt our meetings sometimes. And you know, we took them outside and beat their ass. But we weren't going to take that. Now, I'm not saying that's what you can do now. That's what you should do now. But, you know, you can't let somebody with a different ideology come in and force their ideology on you as well. You don't want those type of partners. You don't want that coalition with those type of people, because those people have a very narrow way of thinking. And we don't want narrow-minded people to be part of this movement. You have to have a broad mind. You have to have broad thinking. You got to have to think big.
So before I say the closing final words, just any of your kind of reflections on coming here. And I know you had an event with our comrade Dan Glazebrook. You spoke at the Oxford Union debate just a few days ago as well. It's your first time, I think, visiting here. Mm-hmm. So any closing remarks that you'd like to impart?
Well, I went on a tour of Oxford University, and the person that was doing the tour was an Irish guy, and he was very political, and God, the information that he pointed out to me, a lot that I did not know, that here in the UK, you are in the seat of imperialism, where imperialism really began. And in America, we used to say we're in the belly of the beast, but here you are in the belly of the monster. You are dealing with a monster that has been doing this for centuries, has been oppressing and colonized people for centuries, and you know, and then to come to find out, you know, in the U.S. police shoot people out on the streets. Well, here, they don't shoot you on the streets because there's too many damn cameras around. They take your ass into custody and kill you that way.
Or they put you in the mental hospital.
Or put you in a mental hospital, which almost is far worse than shooting somebody out on the street. It's harder to deal with. When you shoot somebody out on the street like they did in Ferguson and like they did with Eric Garner, you know, there was thousands of cameras that photographed that, and that went all over the country of what they did to Eric Garner. But when you can take somebody and take them back to the station, and they got to end up with a broken neck, and they're paralyzed for the rest of their lives, you guys are dealing with a devious monster, devious monster, and which even more reason why we have to work with a lot of different people and build broad coalitions to illuminate what's going on.
You know, it's interesting what the Panthers, and obviously let alone even more what the comrades in Zimbabwe and Kenya and South Africa and Namibia and India and China, etc., and Vietnam, Korea, etc., you know, millions of our martyred and sacrificed, and it creates trauma, and we live through that trauma, intergenerational trauma. Both my grandfathers fought the British with weapons as well. But how do you, I mean, to close, and before I make my closing comments as well, how do you deal with having, because we were you know, grounding together last night, and you quipped the good old days. They were the good old days, and I said to Aaron, really, were they the good old days? Because you went through a lot of loss and trauma. So how do you, having come through that whole journey, now you still got that motivation? So what keeps you going? How do you gather that strength?
I guess is that I don't like to be defeated. I don't like to give up, and I don't like to see. I mean, if you feel empathy with other people, and if you really love other people and other human beings, that you will understand that when somebody dies by police brutality or whatever it is, that a piece of you is dying as well. You know, when kids are, when people in Gaza are being bombed and killed, and you see that happening, that's a part of you that is dying as well. And so, you know, there's a part of you that should want to stand up and speak for justice and fight against that, because you are a part of humanity. And I just want to say one other little thing is, one of the things that we have to recognize is the trauma that oppressed people go through. You know, we have a lot of trauma in our communities, a lot of trauma, a lot of young people who are traumatized, a lot of adults who are traumatized, and we have to take that into account. You know, that people are traumatized, and that ourselves are traumatized, and that we have to learn how to deal with people in a soft way, in an understanding way, and try to find some type of way to help with that traumatization that we are suffering, and that other people are suffering.
Thank you, sir.